The brightly shining lights of the CNN studio illuminated what was supposed to be an ordinary, routine debate centered around the constitutional powers entrusted to the President of the United States. However, what viewers were about to witness was far from an ordinary exchange. It was destined to become one of the most startling and memorable confrontations in recent television history, an event that would ripple through legal and political discourse for a long time to come. Seated across from each other were two individuals representing starkly different worlds of law and politics. Alan Dershowitz, a highly esteemed professor at Harvard Law School, with decades of experience defending some of the most controversial public figures of the past 50 years, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a former civil rights lawyer who is now serving her second term in the United States Congress. The topic at hand was nothing trivial. It was the delicate and complex subject of executive privilege, specifically examining its boundaries and limitations when it comes to criminal investigations into the highest offices of the land. From the very moment the cameras started rolling, an intense atmosphere filled the room, thick with unspoken tension and anticipation. Dershowitz, known for his trademark confidence and commanding presence, launched directly into an explanation defending the broad legal protections that presidents are traditionally entitled to under the Constitution. His voice, resonant and authoritative, carried years of authority, reflecting over half a century of teaching constitutional law at the top levels of academia and legal practice. His words seemed to convey a certainty rooted in deep knowledge and experience, painting a picture of a legal universe where executive privileges were essential safeguards for the functioning of government. Despite this, Crockett prepared a response, poised and composed. But as she began to articulate her perspective, Dershowitz abruptly interrupted her, his tone dismissive and his gesture reaching out with a wave of his hand. "With all due respect, Congresswoman," he said, his voice tinged with condescension. "This is a profoundly complex constitutional matter. It demands scholarly understanding cultivated over many decades. Perhaps we should, for simplicity's sake, stick to the basics." His words, infused with a sense of superiority, clearly dismissed her attempt at engagement, signaling a belief that only seasoned experts like himself could truly grasp the nuances of the issue. The subtle yet unmistakable condescension in his tone did not go unnoticed. Around the world, viewers could see a flicker of calm resolve ignite in Crockett's eyes. Not anger or frustration, but a steady, measured determination. This was a moment that was about to shift the entire tone of the debate, one that would make the audience reevaluate not only their perceptions of these two figures, but also the nature of the conversation itself. What happened next was nothing short of astonishing. Crockett posed a single, carefully calibrated question, sharp, precise, but incredibly impactful, that cut through Dershowitz's confident veneer. Her query was so direct and effective that it left the seasoned legal expert momentarily speechless, an extraordinary occurrence in the context of decades-long television appearances and legal debates. In that fleeting moment, Dershowitz, who had built his reputation as a quick-witted, formidable defender of constitutional positions, found himself at a loss for words, his prior eloquence suddenly and unexpectedly halted in mid-flow. Behind the scenes, the production team and assistants, usually accustomed to flipping from one subject to another, exchanged wide-eyed glances, stunned by the abrupt shift in the air and the unforeseen turn of events. This brief but powerful exchange rapidly became one of the most shared and discussed clips circulating across social media platforms dedicated to legal and political discourse. Its viral spread signified not just the moment's inherent drama, but also pointed to a deeper, more fundamental shift. Even the most reputable and established experts are not immune to scrutiny or correction. Their arguments, no matter how well established or long held, are subject to challenge and must be continually substantiated. Alan Dershowitz, at the age of nearly 85, had long been considered one of America's most preeminent legal minds, a living legend whose name was virtually synonymous with constitutional law and who had played a significant role in shaping legal thought for over 50 years. His influence and reputation extended far beyond the lecture halls of Harvard, reaching into the national consciousness through numerous televised debates, interviews, and writings. His client list read like a roll call of some of the most controversial figures in recent American history, from O.J. Simpson to Jeffrey Epstein, and even Donald Trump during his first impeachment trial. What made Dershowitz especially formidable was his exceptional mental agility, his nerve for rapid-fire rebuttals, and his unwavering self-confidence. Over the decades, he authored dozens of influential books and argued numerous cases before the Supreme Court, wielding his skills to define and defend broad constitutional interpretations. His approach was often to frame even the most contentious or unpopular positions as reasonable and well-considered interpretations of the law, an art that earned him both admiration and criticism. On television, Dershowitz became a household name. His rapid speech, authoritative tone, and frequent references to his own credentials created an unmistakable persona, a lawyer who was both brilliant and self-assured. The phrase, "I have been teaching constitutional law at Harvard for 50 years," had become a recurring verbal shield, used time and again to silence opposition and establish credibility. Beneath this confident exterior was a profoundly intelligent legal mind, someone who sincerely believed in core constitutional principles, even if those beliefs led him to defend unpopular or hardline positions. His presence in the media and his convincing manner had made him a dominant force, shaping public opinion on constitutional and legal debates for generations. Critics have increasingly leveled sharp accusations against him, suggesting that he often engaged in selective interpretation of constitutional principles. They argued that he applied rigorous, strict standards of constitutional scrutiny when defending certain clients, yet surprisingly relaxed these very standards when it suited his interests or particular cases. This perceived inconsistency, treating similar constitutional issues in different ways depending on the case, gradually damaged his once unassailable reputation for impartiality and unwavering integrity. However, despite this mounting criticism and the doubts cast upon his approach, his confidence remained unshaken. He continued to stand tall, unwavering in his conviction that he was upholding the essence of constitutional law, regardless of the public opinion shifting around him. Standing face to face with him during this critical moment was Representative Jasmine Crockett, a relatively new member of Congress who represented Texas's 30th congressional district. Having entered the legislative arena only in her second term, Crockett had quickly earned a reputation as a powerful and compelling voice in the debates surrounding constitutional issues and civil rights legislation. Her voice carried weight and credibility beyond her years, thanks in part to her impressive background prior to her entry into politics. She had forged a distinguished career as a civil rights attorney within Texas, gaining recognition for her unwavering dedication to justice and equality through high-profile legal battles. A graduate of the renowned University of Houston Law Center, Crockett developed her expertise handling cases that often involved hot-button issues such as voting rights, police misconduct, and efforts to reform the criminal justice system. Her most significant legal achievement was securing victory in a groundbreaking case that challenged discriminatory bail practices, a victory that prompted important reforms not only in her state, but in several others as well. This legal triumph underscored her commitment to fighting systemic injustices and her skill as a lawyer capable of navigating complex judicial processes. Unlike many political figures who often lacked deep legal expertise, Crockett approached her role in Congress with the precision and evidence-based reasoning of a seasoned trial lawyer. Her meticulous preparation, attention to detail, and unwavering focus on facts earned her a reputation for being consistently well-prepared and unflappable, even under intense pressure. These qualities proved invaluable both in the courtroom and during congressional hearings, where she frequently upheld her arguments with clarity and conviction. Her colleagues and constituents, valued her for her ability to cut through political noise and her unwavering commitment to the rule of law. "I don't come into these discussions just to perform or to put on a show," Crockett once confided in a reporter. "My purpose is to seek the truth, and sometimes that means wading through a lot of background noise, distractions, and misconceptions in order to get to the real issues that matter." Her straightforward approach and readiness to confront difficult questions made her a formidable presence in any debate. The television debate in which these two figures, Dershowitz and Crockett, found themselves sharing the stage was broadcast on CNN and centered around a recent landmark ruling by the Supreme Court concerning executive privilege. Specifically, they discussed whether former presidents still retain the right to assert this privilege after leaving office. Dershowitz had publicly championed a broad interpretation of these powers, arguing that executive privilege extended well beyond the period of a presidential term, allowing former leaders to shield certain documents or communications from legal scrutiny. This stance supported the idea that the presidency's executive authority is enduring and only limited by specific legal constraints. The stakes for both participants in this debate could hardly have been higher. For Dershowitz, this was a vital opportunity to reaffirm his relevance and intellectual authority amid a period when his reputation had suffered from controversy and public critique. Restoring confidence in his legal interpretations was crucial to maintaining the influence he had cultivated over the years. Meanwhile, Crockett saw this as her moment to challenge what she believed were dangerous constitutional misinterpretations, ones that could threaten the fundamental rule of law and the delicate balance of powers established in the Constitution. The studio was set up in the typical CNN debate format, with a sleek desk separating the participants and a professional moderator in the person of Anderson Cooper. The backdrop was decorated in the traditional red, white, and blue colors, creating an atmosphere of seriousness and formality, appropriate for constitutional discourse. Behind the scenes, the production team expected a spirited but routine exchange of views, anticipating a clash of well-articulated ideas rather than any personal conflicts. Dershowitz, an established fixture on the network known for his provocative, sometimes controversial, yet visually compelling arguments, was a familiar presence on television screens. On the other hand, Crockett, although rapidly gaining recognition and respect, was confronting someone of Dershowitz's stature for the first time in such a prominent live setting, eager to make her mark in this high-stakes forum. Tonight, we are discussing the boundaries of executive privilege following the Supreme Court's recent decision, Cooper began, setting the tone for the debate. Turning to Dershowitz, he asked, "Professor Dershowitz, you have taken a position that many constitutional scholars find questionable. Could you please explain the reasoning behind your stance?" Dershowitz nodded with a confident demeanor, ready to articulate his argument. "Certainly, Anderson," he responded. "Having taught at Harvard Law School for more than 50 years, I have observed and studied the development of constitutional doctrine extensively. I believe that executive privilege plays a vital role in our system, serving as a crucial safeguard for the separation of powers. It allows presidents to receive candid advice from their advisors without the fear that these communications will be exposed and used against them later. Given this long-standing understanding, I argue that the authority of executive privilege does not simply vanish once a president leaves office. It continues to serve important functions even during the period after they have stepped down. The recent legal ruling, while significant, fails to fully recognize or incorporate the rich and complex historical context in which these kinds of legal protections and constitutional interpretations have been developed over the centuries. The speaker, in a steady voice, proceeded to address the assembled audience or panel for nearly 2 uninterrupted minutes, elaborating on well-known historical precedents and grounding his argument in established legal theory. Throughout this speech, he made frequent references to his extensive professional experience, often reminding listeners of his long-standing work in the field to lend authority to his words. The camera intermittently shifted focus to Crockett, who listened with keen attention, carefully taking notes, illustrating her engagement and readiness to respond. Congresswoman Crockett was called upon by an interviewer or moderator, Cooper, to share her perspective. She responded with a respectful nod and began speaking. "Thank you," she started, "for giving me the opportunity to address this matter." As she delved into her response, she emphasized respect for Professor Dershowitz's distinguished career, which spanned many decades and included numerous contributions to legal scholarship. However, she underlined the importance of drawing a clear distinction between different foundational principles and interpretations, suggesting that perhaps certain fundamental principles are being overlooked in the current debate. At this point, Dershowitz, eager to contribute, interrupted her with a raised finger, signaling his desire to speak. "If I may clarify something," he said, interrupting politely but with unmistakable eagerness. "It's important to recognize that you are relatively new to these constitutional questions, and based on what you've just outlined, there appears to be a fundamental misunderstanding or oversimplification." Cooper stepped in quickly, encouraging Dershowitz to allow Crockett to finish her point. "Professor," he said calmly, "please let the representative complete her explanation." Dershowitz, though nodding in acknowledgement, still wore an expression that betrayed some impatience, hinting at his eagerness to assert his perspective. Crockett resumed, carefully outlining her interpretation of the recent Supreme Court ruling. She cited specific passages from the majority opinion, quoting precise language and explaining its alignment with established legal precedent. Her analysis was meticulously structured, demonstrating a deep understanding of both legal history and the practical implications of the decision. As she spoke, Dershowitz shook his head subtly, his demeanor growing increasingly dismissive and skeptical of her interpretations. With a tone of respectful assertion, he interrupted again, declaring, "That's simply not correct," emphasizing his disagreement. "With all due respect," he continued, "I have argued key cases before the Supreme Court involving exactly these issues, and I can assure you that your interpretation doesn't align with the language and intent of the ruling." From the control room, the executive producer stepped forward slightly, observing the intense exchange. In such debates, it was typical for more seasoned commentators to dominate by interrupting and appealing to their authoritative experience. Yet, Crockett's calm, methodical responses, combined with Cooper's moderating presence, created a notably different dynamic, less confrontational, more focused on clarity and substance. Dershowitz, visibly frustrated, pressed on. "Let me put this as simply as I can. Executive privilege, as I've taught and discussed with thousands of students over a span of 5 decades at Harvard University, is a complex concept." His tone implied confidence born of vast experience. Despite this, Crockett remained undaunted, intent on engaging with the core constitutional issues rather than being sidetracked by credentials or authority. Throughout the exchange, Dershowitz repeatedly invoked his credentials, citing his Harvard position 7 times within roughly 6 minutes, and mentioning his past arguments before the Supreme Court 4 times. Key points designed to assert his authority and credibility. Yet, despite these references, he had yet to directly address specific language from Chief Justice Roberts' recent opinion, which contained clauses and principles that directly contradicted his assertions. Crockett, maintaining her composed demeanor, listened attentively. After a particularly detailed explanation of the limitations embedded in the latest ruling, she spoke again, addressing the nuances of legal concepts that even experienced attorneys sometimes find confusing. "Perhaps I can simplify this," she suggested, "to make it clearer for everyone, including you, Professor, and for our viewers at home." The camera subtly captured a shift in her expression, not anger or frustration, but a clinical, almost analytical focus, resembling that of a seasoned investigator evaluating a witness who had just inadvertently slipped up in their testimony. Calmly, she addressed Anderson, the host or moderator. "Anderson," she said with measured calmness, "I would like to respond to that remark." "Please do," Cooper responded, sensing that tensions were rising and eager to facilitate a constructive exchange. "Professor Dershowitz," Crockett began, her voice steady but firm. "Over the past 6 minutes, you have referenced your Harvard position 7 times and mentioned arguing before the Supreme Court 4 times. However, you have yet to directly engage with the specific language in the recent opinion authored by Chief Justice Roberts that directly contradicts your position. Understanding principles of law is one thing. Applying them correctly requires precise attention to detail and careful analysis of the actual language used in the rulings." She paused briefly, allowing her words to settle, before continuing with even greater clarity and purpose. Applying these principles consistently and without deviation is an essential aspect of rigorous constitutional discourse. As the small, attentive audience of legal journalists, experts, and distinguished guests in the room exchanged glances, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the air. Among them was a respected constitutional law professor who subtly leaned toward a colleague and murmured under his breath, implying that the woman speaking was orchestrating a perfectly timed setup. Her intention appeared clear: to expose contradictions and challenge the consistency of the arguments presented by her opponent. With a measured and deliberate tone, the Congresswoman turned toward the Congressman and asked him directly, "What exactly are you implying by your statements?" Her inquiry was sharp, yet carefully posed to elicit clarity. The Congressman, Dershowitz, responded with a tone that grew increasingly firm and pointed. "I am not implying anything beyond what I have explicitly stated." Crockett, maintaining her composure and calmness, countered with a gentle but firm assertion. "I merely observe that your interpretation of executive privilege appears to fluctuate depending on which figure is invoking it." Her words were designed to highlight what she saw as inconsistency. Dershowitz's face colored with a flush of embarrassment, or perhaps frustration, but he quickly composed himself. He insisted vehemently that such an accusation was entirely false. "My entire career, both as a lawyer and scholar, has been grounded in principle, not partisanship," he declared, emphasizing his lifelong commitment to constitutional fidelity. Crockett acknowledged his claim with an even, purposeful tone. "I appreciate your assertion," she said, "but perhaps it would be prudent to examine the record more closely and see whether the facts support your statement." She then reached for a folder resting on the desk and opened it with purpose. Glancing through her notes, she methodically laid out her evidence. "In 2018, she began, "you argued on this very network that a sitting president cannot be indicted or investigated because such actions would impair his ability to carry out presidential duties." Dershowitz nodded immediately, confirming her recollection. "Yes, that's correct," he replied without hesitation. But Crockett pressed on. "In 1998, however, you argued the exact opposite position regarding a different president, stating explicitly that no one is above the law and that a sitting president cannot obstruct investigations into his conduct without consequences." The room grew noticeably quieter as the gravity of her statement sank in. The studio's floor director, paying close attention, silently signaled to stay focused. This exchange was proving to be a rare and compelling moment of real political and constitutional scrutiny. Feeling the tension escalating, Dershowitz shifted uneasily in his chair, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice slightly defensive, "you are taking my statements out of their proper context." He attempted to justify his position by asserting, "Constitutional interpretation always depends on the specific circumstances of each case, and no statement can be fully understood without considering the particular political environment." Crockett nodded slightly, acknowledging his point, but insisting that the core principles remain consistent. "I agree that context is important," she replied. "But we must be specific about which context we are discussing." "Because the principles at stake are constant, regardless of the times or political climate." Turning another page in her folder, she referenced a different example to continue her line of questioning. "In 2020?" she began. "You stated that abuse of power is not an impeachable offense simply because it is not explicitly named in the Constitution." Then, holding up a copy of an earlier book written by Dershowitz, she added, "Yet, in that same work, you argued that criminal-like conduct, actions that resemble criminal behavior, are sufficient grounds for impeachment, even if they do not violate specific criminal statutes." The silence in the studio thickened, and even the floor director seemed momentarily stunned, realizing that a surprising and revealing exchange was unfolding before everyone's eyes. Dershowitz hesitated, pausing before responding, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. Normally, he would have delivered his quick, authoritative rebuttals without hesitation. But now, he found himself at an unusual disadvantage, confronting a prosecutor's methodical presentation of contradictions spanning many years. His confidence, usually unshakable, faltered for a moment as Crockett laid out a series of conflicting positions that appeared to be inconsistent over the course of decades. He attempted to reconcile his positions by asserting that with proper constitutional analysis, these apparent contradictions could be understood as part of a broader, coherent legal framework. "I believe those positions can be reconciled," Dershowitz insisted, though the cadence of his speech, which was typically fast and assertive, had visibly slowed. Crockett responded calmly but with unwavering firmness. "I would be very interested to hear how you would reconcile these seemingly conflicting statements." Her tone conveyed not skepticism, but a confident invitation for clarification. She continued, "Because, to many observers, including numerous respected constitutional scholars, these differences seem to suggest that your positions are influenced more by a politician's partisan alignment and the particular president involved, rather than by consistent constitutional principles." This exchange, layered with detailed references and sharp contrasts, underscored the complexity and nuance of constitutional interpretation. It revealed how the interpretation of executive authority, impeachment grounds, and the rule of law can sometimes appear inconsistent, depending heavily on political context and personal interpretation of constitutional text. Dershowitz's expression grew visibly tense, his jaw tightening, as if he was preparing to defend himself against an unwarranted attack. He took a moment, and then, voice edged with defensiveness, he declared, "That is an unfair characterization of my work. Throughout my entire career, I have dedicated myself to upholding and defending the fundamental principles enshrined in our Constitution, regardless of which political winds were blowing at any given time." His words were delivered with conviction, yet the calm exterior masked a flicker of irritation that was impossible to conceal. In response, Professor Tant Crockett, her demeanor composed and respectful, replied with measured clarity, "That assertion deserves to be scrutinized carefully when weighed against the record and the facts available." Without hesitation, she reached into her folder and turned to a third page, revealing a document that contained a series of references. She pointedly reminded him, "In 2020, you argued passionately that the president could, under certain circumstances, pardon himself, asserting that such an act would be firmly rooted in constitutional law. However, in the year of 1974, you authored an article where you explicitly stated that if a president were to pardon himself, it would fundamentally undermine the very framework of the Constitution." The subtle shift in the atmosphere was immediately evident. The camera's lens captured the subtle movements on Dershowitz's face. First a flicker of irritation, quickly replaced by a growing sense of unease. Clearly, the narrative he had often relied upon was being challenged head-on. The script of the debate was taking a turn he was unprepared for. The usual pattern in such discussions involved his interlocutors deferring to his authority or retreating into defensive postures. Yet, Crockett's approach was different. She systematically outlined contradictions with a calm, almost clinical precision, leaving no room for dismissal. For the first time in many years, Dershowitz found himself on the defensive, unable to deploy his customary tactics to regain control of the conversation. The studio's atmosphere grew heavy with tension, an almost tangible weight that viewers could feel through the screen. Off-camera, the producer shot a brief glance toward the director and subtly signaled to keep the conversation going, recognizing the importance of allowing this moment to unfold naturally. This was no ordinary broadcast. It was a rare instance of intellectual rigor on live television, an opportunity for genuine accountability where legal expertise was held to public scrutiny, revealing not just disagreements, but illuminating the very foundations upon which legal interpretations were built. As the discussion intensified, Dershowitz attempted to redirect the focus, raising his voice slightly to assert his point.
"I am citing your own words, Professor Crockett," he said, trying to regain authority. "And examining the consistency of your statements is not a personal attack. It's a necessary part of evaluating the validity of your arguments." But Crockett, unperturbed, responded smoothly. "Restating my words and analyzing their coherence isn't an assault of any kind. It's about critically assessing the pillars of your reasoning to ensure they stand on solid ground." She paused briefly, then deliberately closed her folder with calm precision and looked directly into his eyes, signaling that she was about to deliver a question poised to strike at the core of his credibility. The studio fell silent as everyone waited, knowing that this was the defining moment of the debate. Carefully, Crockett leaned forward just slightly, her expression focused and composed. Her tone was steady, but unmistakably pointed. "Professor Dershowitz," she began, "after teaching constitutional law for over 50 years, I'd like to ask you, when the American people look to your interpretations of the Constitution, should they trust the version that tends to benefit the Republican side of politics, or the one that seems to contradict or undermine your previous statements when it serves Democratic interests?" The simplicity, yet starkness, of her inquiry created an almost heavy silence in the studio. The moment stretched out, as if time itself paused. Even behind the camera, the crew could sense that history was being made. Co-anchor Cooper, observing the scene, raised his eyebrows in acknowledgement of the sharpness and clarity of the question. Dershowitz, who had rarely been caught at a loss for words in public, opened his mouth as if to respond, but then shut it again, seemingly unsure of how to answer. Several agonizing seconds went by. A span felt like an eternity on live television. Every nuance of his face was captured. The widening of his eyes, the faint parting of his lips, the subtle flush that appeared on his cheeks as he hesitated. Here was a man renowned nationwide for his mastery of legal argumentation, widely respected for his knowledge and experience, suddenly rendered momentarily speechless in front of a broad audience. Meanwhile, in the control room, the executive producer whispered urgently into the microphone, "Stay on him. Don't cut away. We are witnessing something historic." It was clear to everyone involved that this was not just another debate. It was a defining moment of televised discourse, an unfiltered confrontation that laid bare the principles of law, integrity, and accountability in real time. Finally, Dershowitz managed to speak, but his voice lacked the assured authority that audiences had come to associate with him. His words stumbled out, tinged with uncertainty
and a trace of embarrassment. That's an unfair characterization of my work," he stammered, struggling to form coherent defense in the face of the pointed question. His usual confident stance had faltered, revealing a rare moment of vulnerability in what was normally a commanding presence. It was a vivid illustration of how even the most seasoned legal minds could be momentarily disarmed when confronted with incisive, well-prepared questions that cut straight to the heart of their expertise and principles. My insights and evaluations are rooted in a firm belief in the fundamental principles that underpin our Constitution. Principles that transcend mere partisan loyalties or temporary political considerations. I approach these issues with a mindset shaped by respect for constitutional law, rather than by allegiance to any particular political faction or the shifting winds of electoral convenience. However, despite this principled stance, the damage was already inflicted. The earlier moments of hesitation, the subtle wavering in his voice, these were not lost on the audience. To millions of viewers watching from their homes or workplaces, the words he spoke sounded empty, lacking conviction, even to himself. The wavering tone betrayed uncertainty and undermined his credibility, casting doubt on the strength of his arguments. Crockett, observing this, chose not to press the issue immediately. Instead, she allowed the tense pause to linger, creating a moment of silence that served a strategic purpose. This was a deliberate technique she had perfected over years of courtroom experience, where silence and patience could make witnesses uncomfortable or lead them to self-destruction. Her calm presence underscored her confidence, giving him space to reconsider his words. When she finally spoke, addressing him with measured respect, she aimed to steer the discussion with precision. "Professor, with all due respect," she began, "I didn't come here to inquire about your intentions or personal views. What I want to understand is this. Among your various, and often contradictory, interpretations of constitutional principles, which version do you believe the American people should accept as accurate? Because, in your explanations, both cannot be right at the same time." This question hung in the air, heavy with implication. It touched on a core issue. How can constitutional interpretation, which often involves complex nuances and judgments, be trustworthy if different authoritative figures offer conflicting viewpoints? Cooper, sensing the seriousness of the moment, intervened carefully, seeking to control the rhythm of the discourse. "Professor Dershowitz," he asked softly, "would you be willing to respond directly to the Congresswoman's query?" Demonstrating an effort to regain his footing, Dershowitz sought to justify his shifting perspective. "Constitutional interpretation," he explained, "is not static. It evolves over time as new precedents emerge and as we examine historical contexts more deeply. My understanding develops as I analyze the law, precedents, and the broader historical background." Crockett raised an eyebrow, listening carefully. Her next words carried a tone of subtle skepticism. "That's an interesting perspective," she acknowledged, "but it doesn't clarify why, throughout your career, your interpretations have consistently aligned with the political interests of whichever party or side you happen to be defending at the moment. It makes one wonder whether your explanations reflect genuine legal reasoning or a form of advocacy." Turning toward the camera, she addressed the viewers directly, making sure her words reached beyond the immediate courtroom or hearing chamber. "This discussion isn't just about Professor Dershowitz personally," she emphasized. "It's about the broader integrity of our constitutional conversations, debates that shape the foundation of our nation. When legal experts present partisan biases, preferences disguised as objective constitutional interpretation, it weakens the very rule of law that holds our society together." Behind the scenes or behind the cameras, journalists buzzed with whispered commentary, rapidly typing notes. one whispered softly to a colleague nearby. She's done what countless interviewers have failed to do: expose a fundamental contradiction in arguments without turning it into a personal attack. Her approach was a masterclass in civics and legal debate, aiming to strip away superficial defenses and reveal underlying flaws in logic. Dershowitz, trying to regain control of the conversation, attempted the usual defensive tactic. "The Congresswoman is merely playing to the cameras," he argued, rather than engaging seriously with complex constitutional principles. His tone suggested displeasure at her straightforwardness.
Crockett, unperturbed, responded evenly. "Professor, I am citing your own published statements to support my point." She paused, emphasizing her words. "If what I'm pointing out is merely playing to the cameras, then the problem resides with the inconsistency of your public statements over time, not with my questions." Her reply subtly challenged him to reflect on his own record. The production team, watching from behind the scenes, reacted with subtle gestures, raising eyebrows, exchanging knowing looks, almost imperceptibly expressing their recognition of the significance of her approach. Smiles almost broke through their restrained expressions. Even Cooper, known for his professional neutrality, couldn't conceal a faint hint of admiration for her thoughtful strategy and calm, precise manner. His nod suggested respect for her handling of the situation. Dershowitz, attempting to reassert his authority, insisted, "My interpretations concerning executive privilege and presidential power are grounded in decades of scholarly work." His voice echoed with an effort to return to the authoritative stance he considered fitting. Crockett, listening attentively, acknowledged his claim without interruption, but then offered her own critique. "Perhaps," she said, "but that doesn't address the core issue. Your interpretations seem to shift depending on which political party controls the office of the president at any given time." Her words cut close to the heart of the matter. She continued calmly, "That pattern suggests more than just scholarly evolution. It appears to be a form of advocacy that wears the guise of analysis. Genuine constitutional understanding wouldn't be so inconsistent. It would be rooted in principles, not in convenience or partisan advantage." She opened her folder again, displaying a stack of documents. "When you wrote back in the year 1998 that obstruction of justice constituted an impeachable offense, something that, in my view, was a clear and resolute stance, and then, in the year 2019, argued that it was not an impeachable offense, this inconsistency raises serious questions. You weren't advancing a coherent understanding of constitutional law. Instead, you seemed to modify your position to defend different clients, depending on the prevailing political climate." Dershowitz, visibly uncomfortable, tried to defend his shifting views. "Those situations were contextually different," he insisted, though his voice no longer carried the conviction it once had. Indeed, his attempt to justify these inconsistencies sounded somewhat hollow, almost apologetic. Crockett, with a composed but pointed tone, responded sharply. "The only consistent thing about your record," she said, "is the pattern aligning with the president's political party. That consistency, or rather lack thereof, reveals what your interpretations are truly based on. They are less about constitutional law and more about partisan allegiance." With deliberate emphasis, she closed her folder, signaling the end of that line of discussion. In this exchange, she had managed to peel back layers of legal reasoning that appeared to be more reflective of strategic positioning than genuine legal analysis. Her questions, rooted in careful examination of his statements and actions over the years, illuminated the underlying issue: the politicization of constitutional interpretation, which threatens the integrity and independence of legal discourse in the United States. "Professor, I hold great respect for your distinguished career
and the numerous contributions you've made to the field of constitutional law. However, there is a significant difference between deepening one's understanding of complex legal principles to refine one's views and simply adopting whatever interpretation might serve a particular political or personal agenda in a given moment. While personal perspectives can evolve with increased knowledge, it is crucial that such evolution is grounded in thorough, principled understanding rather than selective reasoning that merely justifies a preferred stance. The expression on Dershowitz's face momentarily darkened, a flush of embarrassment or frustration, perhaps. It was clear that he felt challenged, and rightly so, as the tension in the room subtly grew thicker. The host, Professor Crockett, then interjected with a firmness that underscored the importance of the matter, sharply addressing what he saw as an oversimplification of a set of deeply intricate questions. Crockett's voice was steady, deliberate, asserting that what was at stake extended far beyond superficial or convenient answers. He questioned the ability, or perhaps the willingness, of Dershowitz to respond to a straightforward inquiry about a pattern that had persisted over many decades. The essence of the challenge lay in assessing consistency, an essential principle in constitutional interpretation. The inability or unwillingness of Dershowitz to provide a clear answer seemed to speak volumes about his approach, or perhaps about the limitations of his argument. It was as if the silence surrounding his response was louder than any words could have been, emphasizing that sometimes the absence of a direct answer reveals more than 1,000 explanations. Meanwhile, the control room was engaged in quiet deliberation, debating whether they should extend the segment or bring it to an end. The footage was captivating. Viewers were witnessing not just a debate, but a real-time exercise in intellectual integrity. However, there was also an underlying consideration to conclude the discussion before Dershowitz's credibility might suffer further damage, a testament to how deeply this exchange was resonating with the audience. In a last-ditch effort to defend his position, Dershowitz attempted to invoke his authority. He turned to the Congresswoman and made a calculated appeal. "I've spent 50 years teaching constitutional law at Harvard. I've argued more Supreme Court cases than you've probably read." It was a plea rooted in credentials, an attempt to establish a barrier of legitimacy around his opinions. But she remained composed and unbothered by the provocation. Her response was calm, yet pointed. She addressed the issue not by questioning his expertise, but by challenging the consistency of his interpretations over time. She articulated clearly that praise for credentials does not automatically equate to consistency in legal reasoning. An appeal to authority, she emphasized, is not an answer to a question about whether arguments are logically or factually coherent when viewed through the lens of constitutional principles. That distinction is vital in any serious debate about law and interpretation. Her words underscored that expertise alone does not grant immunity from scrutiny. Even the most seasoned scholars must be held accountable for maintaining coherence across different statements and positions. Turning slightly toward the host, Anderson, the host immediately picked up on this critical moment. He observed that when confronted with decades of seemingly contradictory statements, Dershowitz's typical response was to invoke his extensive resume rather than reconcile inconsistencies. Rather than addressing the discrepancies directly, Dershowitz resorted to reminding the audience of his historical achievements, his decades of teaching at Harvard, and his extensive legal experience, trying to shield himself from the logic of the critique. Anderson, perceptive as he was, recognized the importance of this exchange and understood that it represented a pivotal moment in the discussion. He pressed further, turning to Dershowitz with a direct question. "Professor Dershowitz, how would you respond to the specific contradictions that the Congresswoman has pointed out? How do you reconcile these conflicting statements about the president's immunity?" Dershowitz, perhaps steeling himself for the challenge, began to speak, suggesting that constitutional issues are inherently complex and that different circumstances may justify different interpretations, an argument that, while technically true, missed the critical point raised by the host and the Congresswoman. Crockett gently cut him off, emphasizing the need to be precise.
"Let me clarify," Crockett said. "This isn't merely about theoretical nuances. It's about a fundamental principle that should guide all serious constitutional discourse, namely, consistency." He looked directly into Dershowitz's eyes, making sure his message was clear. "When you tell the American people that a sitting president is immune from investigation in 2019, and then argued the exact opposite in the year 1998, you are not enhancing constitutional understanding. Instead, you are using your authority and reputation to obscure the truth and possibly to serve partisan interests. That's a dangerous path for any scholar or commentator." The clarity and straightforwardness of Crockett's framing left Dershowitz with very few options. He could not deny that these statements had been publicly recorded. Retracting them would demand a stark acknowledgement of inconsistency. He could not argue that his changing views were mere coincidences, perfectly aligned with partisan preferences. Such an assertion would be transparently false and easily refuted. And he could no longer dismiss Crockett as uninformed or naive, given her command over constitutional principles and her grasp of his previous work. This moment was a stark reminder to everyone watching that the American public deserves better than inconsistent rhetoric masked as expertise. They deserve experts who adhere to the same rigorous standards regardless of which side is in power, who analyze issues based on fundamental principles rather than partisan convenience. The importance of honest, principled interpretation could not be overstated, especially in an era when the lines between opinions and advocacy easily blur. Crockett continued, addressing viewers directly. Her voice was steady and earnest, emphasizing that they, as citizens and consumers of information, have a right to expect transparency, consistency, and integrity from those who comment on the Constitution. The public deserves experts who apply the same exacting standards universally, independent of political context. She called for analysis rooted in principle, not partisanship, and for honesty about where legitimate interpretation ends and advocacy begins. The studio descended into a profound silence, unusual and almost palpable. Even the usually energetic production team fell silent, collectively witnessing a rare instance of challenge to a seasoned constitutional scholar. Not merely an attack on his arguments, but a fundamental questioning of the approach to constitutional commentary on mainstream cable news. It was a true test of integrity for Dershowitz, who looked increasingly uneasy. Turning toward Cooper, he appeared to seek support, or perhaps a way out, with an almost pleading expression on his face. Recognizing the gravity of the moment, Cooper carefully posed a question, aware of its significance. "Professor, would you like to respond directly to the Congresswoman regarding your stance on consistency and interpretation?" The prompt was gentle but pointed, inviting Dershowitz to clarify how he planned to reconcile these contradictions. Dershowitz, apparently sensing that this was a critical juncture, reaffirmed his commitment, insisting, "I have always followed the Constitution." But his tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty. The scene captured the difficulty faced by many scholars, caught in the tension between deep legal expertise and the necessity of consistent application of principles, an ongoing challenge in the complex world of constitutional debate. Although his voice lacked genuine conviction, there was a certain clarity in the way he expressed himself, making it clear that he was aware of the complexities involved. Different situations demand different applications and interpretations of the principles we hold dear. What might be appropriate in one context may not hold in another, depending on the circumstances at play. Crockett, recognizing this nuance, considered that such a stance could be understandable and even reasonable, but only on the condition that these differences were rooted in objective facts rather than shifting political allegiances or shifting the interests of certain beneficiaries. It was essential for the American public to see that the application of principles was consistent and not merely a smokescreen for partisan manipulation or political expediency. The citizens of this nation have developed a keen ability to discern when principles are upheld with integrity
and when they are being exploited or distorted for political gain. They deserve, above all, leaders and experts who genuinely respect and honor their intelligence, acknowledging that people are capable of recognizing honesty versus superficiality. Cooper, observing the exchange unfold, sensed that the discussion had reached a natural turning point, a moment where further debate would likely be unproductive. It was evident that Professor Dershowitz had been given several chances to reconcile his apparent contradictions, yet he had faltered each time, unable to align his statements with the consistency expected of a serious legal thinker. Recognizing the futility of continuing with an unproductive back and forth, Cooper decided it was time to pause. Quietly, he addressed the others involved, saying, "It's best that we take a short break now." Turning to the assembled participants, he added politely but firmly, "Professor Dershowitz, Congresswoman Crockett, I want to thank you both for this illuminating discussion." As the cameraman prepared to cut to a commercial or to the next segment, Crockett, feeling it necessary to leave one final message clear and impactful, spoke up. She emphasized that this debate was not about her or Professor Dershowitz specifically, but about a broader principle. Society must demand that legal authorities and constitutional interpreters act consistently, applying the same standards regardless of whether such adherence benefits or undermines political interests. She made it clear that the Constitution, as the foundational legal document of the nation, deserves unwavering respect, even when its application leads to conclusions that are politically inconvenient or uncomfortable. The camera captured Dershowitz's facial expression at that moment, a mixture of frustration, perhaps even a hint of grudging respect. For perhaps the first time in many years, he found himself speechless, not because of personal criticism or attacks, but because the clarity of Crockett's argument had laid bare the contradictions embedded in his previous statements. Her calm, precise presentation had left him unable to articulate a counter-argument. Back in the control room, the producers and technical staff reviewed the footage, fully aware that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. A typical legal debate had been transformed into a masterclass in accountability and intellectual honesty. What had appeared as a routine confrontation had turned into a powerful demonstration of how to challenge authority, not through rhetoric or personal attacks, but through the careful presentation of evidence and unwavering adherence to principle. In the hours that followed, the impact of the Crockett-Dershowitz exchange extended well beyond the walls of the CNN studio. Clips from the discussion spread rapidly across various social media platforms, flooding feeds and timelines with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of views. The comment section was filled with discussion, admiration, and analysis, as viewers reflected on the significance of what they had just witnessed. What distinguished this moment from countless others was not only the dramatic silence that overtook Dershowitz during the interview, but also the methodical, respectful way in which Crockett had exposed decades of contradictions in his constitutional interpretations. This wasn't just a superficial media stunt. It was a substantive moment of truth and clarity that resonated deeply with legal scholars, students, and ordinary viewers alike. At Harvard Law School, where Dershowitz had been teaching for nearly 50 years, the ripple effects of the debate were immediately apparent. Professors and students eagerly dissected the exchange, recognizing it as an extraordinary educational opportunity. A prominent constitutional law professor was quoted in the Harvard Crimson stating, "This confrontation has ignited more meaningful discussion about consistency in legal interpretation than I have seen in many years." Students took to dissecting the quotations, analyzing how Dershowitz's stance had evolved, or perhaps regressed, over time, comparing his previous statements from many years ago with his recent assertions, to see whether his principles had been applied with genuine consistency or whether he had selectively interpreted legal norms to suit particular narratives. The debate quickly became a case study in ethics, illuminating the importance of integrity and coherence in legal commentary and constitutional interpretation. Across the broader media landscape, commentators, ranging from television analysts to online political commentators, began to grapple with the significance of what had transpired. Rachel Maddow, a well-known MSNBC host, described the episode as a masterclass in how to challenge authoritative figures without resorting to personal insults or ad hominem attacks. Meanwhile, conservative analyst Andrew McCarthy, writing in the National Review, acknowledged that regardless of individual political views, what Congresswoman Crockett had demonstrated was a model of substantive debate, one grounded in the facts, respectful of the principles involved, and unafraid to question contradictions. Social media users, who often tend to focus on sensationalism, instead engaged in unusually thoughtful discussions, sharing clips from the exchange, highlighting key moments, and posting examples of other public figures who had reversed or modified their positions depending on the political climate. In the end, this episode served as a reminder that genuine integrity and consistency in legal and constitutional interpretation are vital for a functioning democracy. It demonstrated that through respectful dialogue, grounded in evidence and principle, it is possible to challenge even the most entrenched authorities and expose contradictions that might otherwise go unnoticed or unaddressed. The effects of that confrontation extended beyond a single televised debate, sparking conversations in legal classrooms, think tanks, and policy discussions across the nation. It underscored that holding public figures accountable, especially those responsible for interpreting the nation's constitution, requires not only knowledge and expertise, but also the courage to stand firm in the face of opposition and the wisdom to maintain respect and civility. In a remarkable turn of events that unfolded almost overnight, Crockett's profile across the nation rose to unprecedented heights. Her reputation skyrocketed, and her office was inundated with thousands of emails within just 48 hours, a tidal wave of messages coming not only from her dedicated supporters, but also from Americans representing a broad spectrum of political beliefs and ideologies. What captivated so many was not merely her stance on specific issues, but her unwavering commitment to a meticulous and principled approach to constitutional interpretation. People from different sides of the political divide found themselves genuinely impressed by her consistent application of constitutional principles, which highlighted her integrity and intellectual honesty in a landscape often marked by partisan assertion rather than reasoned debate. Among these messages, one email in particular, received from a seasoned conservative lawyer based in Ohio, encapsulated the sentiments felt by many. The lawyer wrote, "While I find myself strongly disagreeing with your political views, I must commend your unwavering dedication to constitutional consistency. That kind of intellectual honesty is sorely needed in these times, and it transcends partisan lines. We could certainly use more individuals committed to upholding the principles of our Constitution with such integrity." This heartfelt acknowledgement underscored how her principled stance struck a chord beyond mere partisanship, inspiring respect from unexpected quarters. The ripple effect of Crockett's principled approach extended especially into the realm of legal education. Law students, observing her conduct, felt deeply motivated and inspired, leading to a significant surge in engagement with constitutional law and related fields. Memberships in prestigious constitutional law societies experienced an extraordinary increase, with new enrollments climbing sharply, so much so that applications for Crockett's congressional internship program, which had previously not been the focus of widespread attention, tripled in a matter of weeks. A prominent Yale law student, whose comments appeared in the Washington Post, expressed how this episode rekindled their passion for law. The student reflected that witnessing her exchange was more than a mere display of debate. It reminded aspiring lawyers of the core purpose of their profession. They clarified that their motivation was not just to win arguments, but to uphold fundamental principles consistently, observing that Crockett's actions exemplified what true legal integrity should look like. Across the entire country, leading law schools took notice of the significance of this exchange. Many incorporated it into their curricula, using it as a case study to explore the delicate balance lawyers and commentators must strike between advocacy ethics and genuine interpretation. The episode became a pedagogical tool, prompting students to analyze the importance of maintaining ethical consistency and intellectual honesty under the pressures of public discourse. However, the impact on Dershowitz was markedly different and more complicated. At first, some of his supporters came to his defense, arguing that Crockett's criticisms or statements had been taken out of context, attempting to shield him from outright criticism. Yet, as the full transcript of the exchange circulated more widely, particularly the moments where Dershowitz struggled to reconcile apparent contradictions in his own positions, the earlier defenders gradually began to waver. Even his most steadfast admirers started questioning the coherence of his approach, as inconsistencies and unaddressed contradictions became more visible. This gradual shift in perception subtly altered his reputation, which had long been established as the unquestioned authority of cable news commentary in legal and political circles. Previously, the strength of his influence stemmed from his credentials, confidence, and polished rhetoric. But now, the media landscape started to change. Network hosts, who had previously relied heavily on his status as an expert, no longer accepted his word without critical examination. Instead, they posed pointed, challenging questions about his consistency, his previous positions, and whether his arguments could stand up to scrutiny. The new tone sought more than mere authority. It aimed at substantive discussion, grounded in coherence and truth, expecting clear, honest answers rather than appeals to reputation or experience. This shift was further reinforced by the rising popularity of media training and crisis management programs. Jennifer Martinez, a renowned expert in crisis communications, explained in a widely circulated LinkedIn post how the Crockett-Dershowitz exchange had been integrated into training modules. She highlighted how Crockett's approach, never raising her voice, avoiding personal attacks, and consistently anchoring her responses in documented statements, serves as a model of effective and responsible debate. Her method exemplifies how to hold individuals accountable through evidence-based discussion, demonstrating that firmness and civility can coexist to uphold principles without descending into personal conflict. The ripple effect of this episode extended well beyond media training and into the core of legal education itself. Universities such as Columbia, Georgetown, and Yale responded by introducing specialized modules focused on professional ethics and the moral responsibilities that come with commentary and public discourse. These programs emphasize the importance for legal commentators and practitioners to maintain consistent principles, regardless of external pressures or attempts to distort their positions. Professor Maria Gonzalez of Georgetown University, speaking about these developments, reported that her enrollment in ethics courses had doubled, reflecting a burgeoning student interest in understanding the nuances of balancing advocacy with honest, principled analysis. She observed that students were fascinated by the tension inherent in these dilemmas, how to passionately argue a position while staying true to the integrity of honest inquiry. In addition, many legal commentators and public intellectuals proactively began addressing potential contradictions within their own statements. They issued clarifications, published updates, and openly reconciled evolving viewpoints, recognizing that accountability and consistency are vital for maintaining credibility. This proactive stance fostered a culture of transparency, driven by the awareness that public trust hinges on coherence and integrity. The media landscape responded to these changes as well. Network executives felt mounting pressure to scrutinize expert commentary more rigorously, demanding higher standards of consistency and factual accuracy. Internal analytics at CNN revealed that the segment featuring Crockett and Dershowitz had garnered more engagement than any other legal discussion in the network's history, a clear indication that viewers yearned for content rooted in principled accountability rather than sensationalism or spectacle. Jennifer Patel, a respected digital media analyst, explained that for decades, viewers were conditioned to expect confrontational and emotionally charged content. However, data now suggested a significant shift. Audiences were increasingly drawn to substantive, evidence-based discourse rooted in principles and integrity. This evolving media consumption pattern pointed toward a broader cultural transformation, one where genuine accountability, honest debate, and principled reasoning become more valued than performance or superficial conflict. These developments indicated a future where the public's appetite for meaningful discussions might replace the old paradigm of sensationalism, fostering a more informed and critically engaged society. Approximately 3 weeks after that notable interview, Dershowitz, a figure renowned for his steadfast refusal to acknowledge criticism or admit to any flaws, made a surprising move by publishing a guest editorial in the Wall Street Journal. The piece bore the title, "Constitutional Consistency in the Evolution of Legal Thought," immediately signaling a focus on the fundamental principles that underpin his approach to constitutional interpretation. In his writing, he openly addressed a crucial topic that has increasingly gained attention in public discourse: how legal minds, especially those who interpret the Constitution, maintain consistency amid the evolving landscape of laws, societal values, and political pressures. He expressed that in recent public conversations, legitimate and pressing questions have arisen about whether legal systems and interpreters remain true to their foundational principles or drift away into subjective or partisan reasoning. While he reaffirmed his unwavering confidence in his own analyses and viewpoints on specific cases he had previously discussed, Dershowitz was careful to acknowledge a more nuanced point. He recognized that personal beliefs, political ideologies, and external pressures can, consciously or unconsciously, influence even the most seemingly objective legal judgments. This humility, rare for someone generally known for his unwavering defense of his positions, marked a moment of intellectual honesty. He emphasized that a lifelong dedication to the Constitution, and thus to the very core of American legal and political identity, necessitates a relentless process of self-scrutiny. This process must ensure that one's interpretations are rooted in the original principles of justice and fairness, rather than shaped by transient preferences or external influences. This article was a remarkable shift for Dershowitz. Usually, he had been a staunch defender of his positions, dismissing doubts or contradictions as superficial or misinformed. His willingness to admit the complexity of constitutional interpretation and to hint at the possibility of past discrepancies reflected a subtle but notable change in his approach. In subsequent public appearances and interviews, Dershowitz displayed a somewhat softened attitude. He admitted more openly that there could be tensions or disagreements between his previous statements and current positions, but he approached these with a view toward reconciliation. Instead of outright dismissing or ignoring apparent contradictions, he offered substantive explanations or contextualizations, demonstrating an evolving understanding of the nuanced nature of legal principles and their application over time. This remarkable exchange quickly attracted scholarly attention. Scholars of law and ethics saw in this a valuable case study illustrating the importance of accountability, integrity, and civility in public debate. Professor James Wilson from Yale Law School incorporated the full transcript of the interview into his curriculum on professional responsibility, highlighting to his students the vital role of transparency and honest dialogue in maintaining the credibility of legal commentators. He emphasized that genuine accountability and meaningful discussion can be conducted without resorting to personal attacks, inflammatory rhetoric, or partisan finger-pointing, traits that often tarnish public discourse. The significance of this exchange was not lost on journalism schools either. For instance, the Columbia School of Journalism introduced a dedicated workshop titled Beyond Gotcha: Substantive Accountability in Public Discourse. The aim was to teach future journalists to scrutinize authorities and public figures with a focus on evidence, logical coherence, and principled reasoning, rather than pursuing sensationalism or mere confrontation. One highlighted teaching method involved dissecting Crockett's careful, methodical approach to questioning authority figures. This method prioritized fact-based analysis over theatrical display, looking at how effective interviews can inform the public and enhance democratic accountability. Perhaps most impactful was the transformation this viral conversation prompted in the perception of constitutional debates among the general public. Polls conducted a few weeks subsequent to the segment indicated that approximately 68% of Americans who watched it expressed an earnest desire to deepen their understanding of how constitutional principles are applied consistently, regardless of political disagreements. This statistic underscored a burgeoning awareness of the importance of principled reasoning in legal interpretation. Media analyst David Chen remarked on this shift, stating, "For decades, the reputation of legal commentators and scholars was primarily judged based on their credentials, eloquence, and the persuasiveness of their arguments. What this exchange demonstrated, however, is that consistency, how well someone applies core principles over time, is an equally vital measure of credibility and integrity." This recognition of the value of consistency as a core virtue proved to be highly influential in reshaping public perceptions. Even half a year later, the ripple effects of this high-profile debate persisted. Many law schools reported a noticeable increase in enrollment interest in courses dedicated to the history and philosophy of constitutional interpretation. Prominent legal commentators and thinkers increasingly addressed the theme of evolving viewpoints, emphasizing that principled consistency remains central to understanding the Constitution's enduring relevance. This newfound appreciation for consistency resonated during critical moments such as the Senate confirmation hearings for a newly nominated Supreme Court justice. Senators from both major political parties began explicitly asking nominees about their views on maintaining consistent constitutional interpretations. One senator, citing the Crockett-Dershowitz exchange as a defining example, posed a pointed question: "How can Americans trust that your interpretations of the Constitution are based on consistent principles and not simply on the outcomes you favor at the moment? What personal safeguards do you employ to ensure that your reasoning remains faithful to these principles across the years?" This incident, initially a viral television moment, had thus transcended its original medium, becoming a symbol of the ongoing debate about integrity, principled reasoning, and accountability within the highest echelons of the judiciary. It exemplified how a simple yet profound exchange could spark lasting reflection on the values and practices that form the foundation of American constitutional democracy. The incident served as a catalyst for a subtle yet profoundly impactful shift in the way legal expertise was perceived and evaluated across America. In a nation increasingly divided along political lines, this exchange exemplified how disagreements rooted in core principles could be navigated with integrity and rigor, transforming what might have been seen as mere confrontation into a constructive demonstration of accountability. Instead of exacerbating polarization, it offered a blueprint, an example of how principled debate fosters not only clarity, but also respect for the complexity inherent in legal and ethical issues. Over time, this exchange began to influence the educational landscape, prompting legal textbooks and curricula to incorporate it as a pivotal case study in the realm of professional ethics. Professors and students alike started recognizing its significance, and a particular casebook, widely used in law schools, dedicated an entire chapter to the theme of consistency across political divides, emphasizing the moral and ethical responsibility law commentators bear to maintain impartiality. This chapter was not merely theoretical. It used the Crockett-Dershowitz interaction to illustrate what it truly means to uphold integrity under scrutiny. It analyzed how Crockett's methodical and almost forensic approach uncovered crucial questions concerning advocacy and objectivity, questions that are central for law students striving to understand how to balance passionate legal arguments with unwavering impartiality. For citizens and commentators navigating an environment flooded with complex, often conflicting information, this example served as a compass, guiding them toward a more thoughtful understanding of responsible commentary. This exchange left an enduring legacy, framing a core lesson about the most effective way to challenge inconsistent authority. It made it clear that the most persuasive response to inconsistent claims and rhetorical flourishes is not to match them with similar rhetoric, but to meet them with well-founded evidence and calmly articulated principles. Responding to selective interpretations with steady insistence on truth and consistency can more effectively undermine false narratives than heated retorts or personal attacks. It highlighted that credibility is built not through aggressive defense, but through unwavering commitment to factual integrity. As the United States prepared for its next election cycle, an event always accompanied by predictable constitutional debates and conflicting legal interpretations, the significance of the Crockett-Dershowitz interaction persisted. It continued to stand as a reference point, evidence that holding public figures and legal authorities accountable does not require resorting to partisan mudslinging or sensationalism. Instead, it demonstrated that principled scrutiny grounded in evidence and consistency can serve as the foundation of healthy civic discourse. The message was clear. Genuine accountability is rooted in a steadfast dedication to principles, not in personal disparagement or theatrical rhetoric. In a broader sense, this moment carried a vital lesson for American civic life and political culture. True media literacy, at its core, develops not through partisan point scoring or rhetorical competitions, but through an understanding of the importance of unwavering principles. It emphasizes that even the most renowned or influential figures are subject to scrutiny when they deviate from consistency or betray the standards they claim to uphold. Millions of viewers witnessed this exchange, learned from it, and shared those lessons, creating a ripple effect reaching far beyond the immediate debate. This ripple extended into the fields of legal education, journalism, and public discourse, where the values demonstrated during that exchange reverberated for many years afterward. Crockett's calm, meticulous, and methodical approach turned what many might consider a routine legal debate into a defining moment for accountability and integrity. On the other hand, Dershowitz's silence, at once shocking and revealing, served as a potent reminder that no matter how storied a reputation may be, it remains vulnerable to scrutiny when consistency is demanded. His silence subtly underscored that reputation alone cannot shield someone from the necessity to adhere to truth and principle under pressure. This incident became a masterclass in holding individuals and institutions accountable to their own standards. It proved convincingly that evidence, when presented with calm clarity, can triumph over theatrics, rhetorical bluster, and authority. It demonstrated that genuine authority is rooted not in power alone, but in consistency, logic, and adherence to principles that withstand scrutiny. By doing so, it showcased the transformative power of integrity and meticulousness in public discourse, qualities that can elevate a routine legal exchange into a powerful moment of accountability and truth.